We needed it more than you. Desmond Griffin, my sister's husband, said it easy, like he was commenting on the weather, whiskey glass loose in his hand, sprawled across the leather sofa like he owned the place. Minutes earlier, I'd waded into the cold edge of Lake Michigan to catch a flip-flop the wind had carried off the dock. My feet were numb, my jeans soaked to the knee. Behind me, through the sliding glass doors of my family's lake house, the one Uncle Maurice bought back in the 90s, the one we all come back to every summer, I could hear the reunion still going. Plates clinking, nephews laughing too loud, somebody's playlist drifting off the porch rail. I'd walked back in, dripping, laughing a little at myself. That's when I heard him say it. The room didn't stop. Nobody put down a fork. Some kid was still giggling in the kitchen. But something in me went very quiet, very fast. I pulled out my phone, meaning only to check on a $320 payment I owed my supplier for Crown & Curl, my salon on Cottage Grove Avenue in Bronzeville. I opened the Chase app, thumb still cold from the lake water. The screen loaded. Balance, $0. I thought it was a glitch. I refreshed it. Same thing. Refreshed it again. 5 years of saving, $187,400. Gone, in what looked like a single overnight transfer. Hold on to that number, $187,400. Because by the end of what I'm about to tell you, it's going to mean something very different than it does right now. This is the kind of drama family reunions are never supposed to become. I didn't fall apart standing there. This wasn't the moment I broke. It was the moment I stopped being surprised. My name is Simone Thornton. I'm 54 years old, and for most of my life I believed one simple thing. If you work hard enough and you love your family enough, everything eventually balances out. That belief had just cracked, standing on wet sand with one shoe still missing by the dock. Standing there, with the screen still glowing 0, my mind didn't panic. It went backward, 11 years, to right after Desmond and my sister Tasha got married. He'd needed $18,000 to start a landscaping business. I had that exact amount sitting in an account earmarked for a second salon location, a dream I'd been building since I was 26, cutting hair in my mother's kitchen on 63rd Street in Inglewood. I gave it to him. No paperwork, no hesitation. Family helps family. That's what I was raised on. I grew up in a brick 2-flat on 63rd Street with a porch swing my grandson swears has been creaking since Eisenhower. My parents, Maurice and Amara Thornton, ran a small auto shop on the south side for 35 years. My father used to say the same thing to me every payday, counting cash into a coffee can he kept in the back office. Black money stays in black hands, Simone. You protect what you build because nobody's coming to protect it for you. I built Crown & Curl with that lesson stitched into every decision. I built it after my husband passed 5 years ago, working 3 a.m. closing shifts, turning down a partnership offer from one of the biggest salon chains in Chicago because some part of me was scared my own family would say I'd gotten too big for us. And apparently I built it so a man on a leather couch could tell me, to my face, that he needed it more than I did. My great-niece Emma, 19, quiet, always watching more than she talks, came up beside me in the kitchen doorway. She wrapped her arms around me for half a second, the way you hug someone at a funeral, and whispered close to my ear, "Auntie Simone, just prepare yourself." I didn't understand yet what she meant. I thought she meant prepare for a fight. I had no idea how much deeper this went. I looked at my phone again, and that's when the second thing happened, the thing that told me this wasn't carelessness. A notification slid down my screen, an old text thread resurfacing from 2 years back. One line from Desmond, dated a summer I barely remembered. "If things ever go south, we can always count on Simone's nest egg. Family first, right?" I stood frozen in that kitchen, lake water drying cold on my ankle, heart pounding against my ribs like something trying to get out. 2 years. He'd been thinking about my money for 2 years. Let me back up, because I want you to know who I was before that night, not just who I became after. I'm 5'9", and I carry myself the way my mother taught me. Shoulders back, chin level, even when my knees are shaking underneath. I wear my hair in natural twist-outs, shoulder length, more silver threading through the black every year. I've stopped hiding it. Sundays I wear an Ankara dress, bright patterns my mother would have loved, flat leather sandals because my feet have earned the rest after 28 years on a salon floor. A thin gold chain sits at my collarbone. My husband gave it to me the year before he died, and I've never once taken it off. I was widowed 5 years ago. James had a heart attack in his own job's parking lot, and I found out over the phone, standing in the middle of Crown and Curl, with a client's foils still cooking under the dryer. I raised our 2 kids mostly alone after that. Xavier, 29, a lawyer now, and Nyla, 27, working cybersecurity downtown. I tell you this because I need you to understand. I wasn't a woman who didn't know how to survive hard things. What I didn't know, what none of us really know until it's staring us in the face, was how much of that survival I'd spent protecting people who weren't protecting me back. There's a piece of paper I still keep folded in my wallet. My father's 2019 cardiology bill, $27,000. I put it on a credit card and paid it off quietly over 18 months so Tasha wouldn't have to worry about our father's health on top of everything else in her life. I never told her. That's just what I did, quietly, the way my mother did things. Standing in that lake house, staring at a zero balance and a 2-year-old text message proving I'd been a mark the whole time, I thought about all of it. The 18,000, the 27,000, the second location I never opened. I want to be honest about something, looking back. My silence was never really about them. It was about a fear I never said out loud, that if I stopped giving, I'd stop being needed. And if I stopped being needed, I didn't know who I was. Every yes I gave Desmond wasn't generosity. It was me avoiding a question I wasn't ready to answer. What happens to a woman who spent 30 years being everyone's safety net the moment she finally sets it down? I closed the app. I set my phone face down on the counter next to a bowl of leftover potato salad and looked out at Lake Michigan. Gray, endless, folding over itself the same way it had for 100 years before any of us were born. I didn't say anything yet. I wasn't ready. But I want you to know, because it matters for everything coming, I was done being surprised. I just didn't know yet that this text message was only the outer layer of something that had been building for far longer than 2 years. If a family member has ever decided your sacrifice was theirs to spend, stay with me. What happened over the next 24 hours in that house is only just beginning. Morning came in soft and gold over Lake Michigan, the kind of light that makes everything look forgivable for about 4 minutes. I hadn't slept. I'd spent most of the night at the kitchen table, oak floors, window looking straight out over the water, turning my phone over in my hands like it might tell me something different if I asked enough times. At 7:14, my phone rang. Claire, my business partner at Crown and Curl, 16 years running the chair next to mine. Simone. Her voice had that flat, careful tension people use when they're bracing you for something. The vendor payment bounced, insufficient funds. I figured it was a fluke, tried again this morning, same thing. I opened the app again in front of her, like saying it out loud might change the number. 0. And now I could see it clearly. The transfer had gone out overnight, routed from this exact house's network. Someone under this roof had reached into 5 years of my life and taken it apart while I slept. I walked into the living room. Sun coming through the big windows, dust hanging in the light, everyone still in that lazy, half-awake, coffee-in-hand state after a big family weekend. Xavier was on the porch on a work call. Nyla was scrolling her phone, half paying attention. Tasha was at the counter pouring Folgers, not looking at me. Desmond hadn't moved from the sofa. My money's gone, I said. Flat. No accusation yet. I wanted to watch faces before I started a war. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when everyone already knows something they're pretending not to know. Desmond leaned back further, arms crossed, face doing nothing at all. Maybe your shop partner messed something up, he said, then almost lazily. Or maybe you just don't know how money works, sister-in-law. Every drama family has that one relative everyone quietly makes excuses for, and in mine, it had always been Desmond. 15 years earlier, at my mother's dining table, I'd asked for help getting a business loan for a second Crown and Curl on South Shore Drive. Desmond had looked around the table and laughed. "Simone ain't no businesswoman. She's just good with hair and paying bills." Everybody laughed. I laughed too, because that's what you did at that table back then. Not long after, I turned down that chain partnership offer, telling myself it wasn't the right time. Really, some small part of me had started to believe him. "You were near my laptop yesterday," I said, looking straight at him. "Were you in my room?" Tasha shot up off her stool so fast her coffee sloshed over the rim. "Are you accusing my husband?" "We needed it more," Desmond said again. Not quite the same words this time, tired of pretending otherwise. "My landscaping business is drowning, Simone. Your kids are grown. Mine still need school clothes." Xavier, still holding his phone, said quietly, almost pleading, "Mom, maybe just let it go this time." He had no idea that 4 years earlier, when he almost dropped out of law school over a semester's tuition, I sold my Honda Civic and picked up overnight shifts to cover it. I never told him. I didn't want him carrying that weight. Then Uncle Maurice spoke. He doesn't talk much. 66, built solid, the kind of man who spent 60 years listening more than speaking. Everyone turned when his voice came out low and rough. "Boy," he said, looking dead at Desmond, "last night I saw you go into Simone's room, round 2 in the morning. Figured you needed to charge your phone. You even waved, said, 'Just grabbing a charger, Uncle.'" Dead silence. Even the birds outside seemed to hold off. Desmond forced a laugh, too fast. "Old man, you must have been dreaming." But I caught it. Tasha's eyes flicking toward me for a fraction of a second. Scared, gone before anyone else noticed. That look told me more than anything Desmond had said all morning. I picked up my bag off the counter. "Then you won't mind what's coming next," I said, and walked out onto the porch to get air, hands shaking in a way I didn't let anyone see. Because what I was about to do wasn't going to be gentle, and a small, cold thought had already started forming, one I wasn't ready yet to say out loud. Desmond thought that was the end of it. He had no idea what was still sitting on my phone, and he had no idea what I was about to do would be so much worse than anything he'd imagined. Uncle Maurice saw Desmond leave that room at 2 a.m., and still nobody moved to stop him from staying in that house another night. Was that loyalty, or was it fear dressed up as keeping the peace? Drop a 1 if you think the family should have thrown him out right then. Drop a 2 if you think Simone was right to wait for proof first. Standing on the porch, I heard the sliding door open behind me, that particular groan the track always made, the one Uncle Maurice kept saying he'd oil and never did. Desmond stood in the doorway, whiskey glass in hand at 9 in the morning, wearing the same loose, superior smile he'd worn all weekend. The lake wind caught the screen door before it could settle, and it clicked twice against the frame, a small metallic sound that seemed too loud for how still everything else had gone. And this time, in front of everyone gathered near the door, Tasha, Xavier, Nyla, Uncle Maurice, he didn't dodge it. "We needed it more than you," he said. Not a denial, a confession, wrapped in entitlement, delivered like he was doing me a favor by admitting it out loud. What Desmond needed wasn't just money. It was to still be the man who provides, even while failing to provide. Every dollar he took from me was proof, to himself, that he hadn't lost control of his own life. Underneath the entitlement was a man terrified of being seen as small, so he made himself feel large the only way he had left, by deciding my sacrifice was simply his to take. Something in me went still and sharp all at once. I've heard people describe anger as heat. Mine wasn't heat, it was the opposite. Cold, settled, like a key turning in a lock. For a moment, nobody moved. I could hear the wind pushing through the pines along the drive, the distant slap of water against the dock pilings, a screen door somewhere down the shoreline banging twice in another family's morning. Xavier had gone still on the porch steps, phone forgotten in his hand, The call he'd been on apparently ended without him noticing. Nyla's eyes moved between Desmond and me, calculating. The same look she gets scanning a spreadsheet for the one number that doesn't belong. And Tasha had both arms wrapped around herself now, like she was cold on a warm morning, like she already knew exactly where the next 10 minutes were going and couldn't stop them from arriving. I called 911. "I'd like to report an ongoing financial fraud," I said, voice even, giving the dispatcher the address, New Buffalo, Michigan, Berrien County. Desmond laughed, delighted almost, rocking back on his heels with the whiskey glass tilting dangerously close to spilling. "Call the police. Tell them you lost your little savings. They'll send somebody out next week, if you're lucky." I noticed in that pause something small. His phone, sitting on the porch railing where he'd set it down, lit up once, briefly, a name I didn't catch flashing across the screen before the display went dark again. He glanced at it fast, almost reflexively, the way you check a stove you're not sure you turned off. Then he looked back at me like nothing had happened at all. I filed it away without understanding why it snagged at me. Just a small itch at the back of my mind, the kind you get when something doesn't quite match the room it's sitting in. While I waited on hold, I opened a folder on my phone I hadn't touched in months. A document I'd scanned years ago and forgotten I still had. A 2016 loan guarantee, my signature at the bottom, co-signing $45,000 for Desmond's first landscaping equipment. He'd defaulted. I paid it off myself over 3 years. I never told Tasha. I was afraid it would break something in her marriage she wasn't ready to look at yet, I thought, holding that old PDF in my hand, about how young Desmond had looked back then. 26, hungry in a way that seemed like ambition at the time. My father used to say he could always tell the difference between a man building something and a man performing the idea of building something. "One sweats quiet," he told me once, watching Desmond talk too fast and too loud at a cookout years ago. "The other just needs you to see him sweat." I hadn't understood what he meant then. I understood it now, standing on that porch with the phone pressed to my ear and $45,000 of quiet proof in my hand. Tasha started crying, real crying, the kind that comes from somewhere long buried. Her shoulders curled inward, and when she spoke, her voice came out broken in the middle, like the words had to fight their way past something lodged in her throat. "I told him not to," she said. "He said if I told you, he'd take the kids and leave me with nothing." The dispatcher's voice was still murmuring something in my ear, tinny and distant, and for a second I couldn't process either sound clearly. My sister's confession and the stranger's calm instructions arriving at the same time, overlapping like two radio stations bleeding into each other. I thought about every 2 a.m. phone call over the years. Tasha sobbing because Desmond had come home drunk again, me driving across the state just to sit with her on a kitchen floor until sunrise, the two of us not talking, just breathing next to each other until the light came up gray through her curtains. I'd carried so much of her weight in silence, believing that was what a big sister does. I never once considered my silence might also be protecting the person hurting her. I need you to sit with me in that moment, because it's the moment everything shifted from a theft into something else entirely. The moment I understood this wasn't only about the money anymore, and maybe it never had been. That's when the second thing landed. Still on hold, an automatic fraud alert slid onto my screen from Chase. Unusual login activity detected, March 12th. The exact same network as his house. My stomach dropped. Back in March, Uncle Maurice's birthday, the whole family had come up for the weekend, Desmond included. I remembered getting that same alert back then and brushing it off as a glitch, too busy with the birthday cake to think twice. I even mentioned it to Nyla in passing. "Bank's been buggy lately." She hadn't said much at the time. I didn't know she'd quietly installed monitoring software on my laptop the following week, just in case. He'd tried once before, in March, and failed, because I happened to be logged in at the same moment, which blocked the transfer without me ever knowing why. I'd missed the signal. I didn't even know there'd been a signal to miss. This wasn't impulse. This was a man who had been patient, calculating for months, waiting for the next weekend when everyone would be too relaxed, too trusting, too full of barbecue and lake water to notice him slip into a back bedroom at 2 in the morning. I thought distantly of how many small comments he'd dropped over those months that I'd let slide past me without weight. A joke once about how easy it'd be to just start over somewhere with better weather. A passing remark at Easter about how Atlanta traffic wasn't as bad as people said. None of it had meant anything to me at the time. All of it, I would understand later, had meant everything. The 911 dispatcher came back on the line, told me an officer would be dispatched, asked me to stay put and avoid confrontation. I hung up and looked at Desmond. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time in 11 years without the softening lens of, he's family, we don't air this out. I saw a man who'd been counting on exactly how much he could take from me before I noticed. And beside him, a sister who'd known, at least in some corner of her heart, and said nothing, because she was afraid of exactly the kind of man standing next to her. Uncle Maurice put a heavy, steady hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His grip was the same one I remembered from being small, standing at my father's funeral all those years before James's. The kind of hand that says, I've got you, without a single word wasted on saying it. I looked out at the lake one more time, flat and silver and patient, and thought about my father's coffee can full of cash and the words he said every payday of my childhood. Black money stays in black hands. You protect what you build because nobody's coming to protect it for you. I'd spent 30 years protecting other people's futures instead of my own. On that porch, something in me quietly decided that chapter was closed. He thought admitting it out loud ended the story. He'd just handed me the first real piece of evidence I needed. And what was still coming was going to make this whole weekend look small. Uncle Maurice saw Desmond leave that room at 2 a.m., and still nobody moved to stop him from staying in that house another night. Was that loyalty? Or was it fear dressed up as keeping the peace? Drop a 1 if you think the family should have thrown him out right then. Drop a 2 if you think Simone was right to wait for proof first. The knock came less than an hour later. Not a knock, really. A hard, flat pounding that rattled the screen door in its frame and sent a spoon clattering off the counter where Tasha had set down her mug without drinking from it. Michigan State Police, Berrien County Sheriff's Office. Nobody move. For a second, nobody in that living room breathed. I remember the specific quality of the silence. Not the tense silence from the morning, but something heavier, almost respectful, the way a room goes still right before a verdict. 2 officers came in first, boots heavy on the hardwood, and behind them a woman in a fitted black suit, gold hoops catching the light through the sliding glass doors. She didn't rush. She stood in the threshold for a full 3 seconds before she said a word, and in that pause I watched her eyes move. Desmond first, then Tasha, then me, then the room itself, like she was reading a floor plan she'd seen 100 times before. Detective Gabrielle Bishop. That's me, I said, stepping forward. Simone Thornton. She nodded once, unhurried. Ma'am, your bank's fraud division flagged a series of overnight transfers and traced the login activity back to this address. We'd like everyone to stay put while we sort through it. I noticed something small then, small enough that I almost missed it. Desmond's phone, face down beside his whiskey glass, buzzed twice against the wood. He flipped it over, glanced, and turned the screen face down again fast, his jaw tightening. He'd been doing that all morning, I realized. Checking it, silencing it, checking it again. Like a man waiting on a call he didn't want anyone else to hear ring through. At the time, I thought it was his landscaping crew. I didn't know yet who was really on the other end of that phone. This is a misunderstanding, Desmond said, and for the first time all weekend, his voice cracked at the edges. Somebody hacked the account. I handed Detective Bishop my phone. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. I noticed that, distantly, the way you notice weather. Nyla stepped forward before I could say anything else. Detective, I can save you some time, she said, calm the way she gets when she already knows how something ends. The same voice she uses when she's 3 steps ahead of a problem at work. She pulled her laptop from her bag, thumb tapping the trackpad twice, and the screen woke with a soft electronic hum that seemed, in that quiet room, unbearably loud. I put monitoring software on Mom's laptop after a suspicious login back in March. It's been capturing every session since. She turned the screen toward Bishop. Time-stamped image after image scrolled past, dates, small green numbers in the corner, until she stopped on one, Desmond, seated at my laptop at 2:17 a.m., the cold blue glow of the screen lighting his face from below, fingers on the keys, a half-empty glass of my good scotch sitting at his elbow, like he'd made himself comfortable while he did it. Nobody spoke. Somewhere outside, one of the younger kids shrieked with laughter down by the dock, utterly unaware that the entire architecture of the family had just come apart 40 feet away, behind glass. "Mr. Griffin," Bishop said, voice dropping flatter, colder. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Desmond thrashed against the officer's grip, whiskey glass finally slipping from his hand and rolling, unbroken, in a slow half-circle on the rug. "Tasha, tell them I didn't do this!" My sister stood very still at the counter, both hands flat on the tile like she needed it to hold her up. Then, in a voice I hadn't heard from her in years, steady, done shaking, "You did it. You know you did, and I'm tired of lying for you." "You think you're anything without me?" Desmond spat, twisting to look at her over his shoulder as the officer guided his arm back. Tasha stepped closer than I expected, close enough that I saw her chin lift the way our mothers used to. "I was nothing with you." Bishop held up a hand for quiet and leaned back over Nyla's screen, zooming in on one frame near the edge of the doorway. 11 seconds, time-stamped. A blurred shape, half in shadow, half lit by the laptop's glow. It was Tasha. Her knees buckled and Uncle Maurice caught her elbow before she went all the way down. "I only stood there a second," she said, voice breaking apart into something raw and childlike. "I was going to stop him. He looked right at me and mouthed, 'the kids,' and I froze." Tasha didn't freeze because she didn't care. She froze because she'd learned, over years, that speaking up cost her more than staying quiet ever did. Her deepest fear wasn't losing money, it was losing her children. And somewhere along the way, Desmond had made sure she believed those were the only two choices. Watching from that doorway wasn't complicity. It was a woman doing the math on which kind of loss she thought she could survive. I took my sister's hand. Her fingers were freezing, even in July. I understood, finally, that she hadn't hidden this out of loyalty to him. She'd hidden it out of fear. Years of a man teaching her exactly how much power he held over her life, one small concession at a time, until the concessions added up to silence. As officers moved Desmond toward the door, one of them patting down his jacket pockets, pulled out a small black USB drive, plastic still warm from his body heat. Bishop took it without a word and plugged it into the laptop already open on the table. One file, the icon blinking to life. gift_letter_Simone_Thornton.pdf. She opened it. A letter, my signature forged at the bottom. Close, closer than I wanted to admit. Close enough that a bank clerk in a hurry might never look twice. I freely gift $187,400 to my brother-in-law, Desmond Griffin, for a family emergency. For a moment, nobody said anything. I heard the refrigerator hum. I heard the lake outside, faint through the glass, folding over itself the way it always did, indifferent to what was happening 40 feet from its shore. "He was going to submit this to the bank," Bishop said, reading it over, her voice flat and professional in a way that somehow made it worse. "Try to get the transfer classified as an authorized gift instead of fraud. That would have made recovering your money a lot harder, maybe impossible." I stood in that kitchen and felt something colder than anger settle over me. Something almost like respect for how thorough the betrayal had been. He hadn't just taken the money. He'd prepared, in advance, a way to make the theft disappear on paper, which meant this hadn't been a moment of desperation. It had been a plan, built slowly, the way you build anything you intend to get away with. Miss Thornton, Bishop said, closing the laptop gently, this isn't a family dispute anymore. This is premeditated fraud. Uncle Maurice's hand found my shoulder again, heavier this time, steadier. Through the window, I watched the officers walk Desmond toward the patrol car, his shoulders no longer carrying the same easy confidence they had all weekend. He didn't look back at Tasha. He didn't look back at any of us. I noticed that too, and filed it away without understanding yet why it mattered. Every drama family has a moment where the mask finally comes off in front of everyone. This was ours. He'd prepared paperwork to erase the theft. What he never once considered was that I'd spent 30 years quietly preparing too. And what he was about to face was so much bigger than a jail cell. The patrol car rolled down the gravel drive, tires crunching slower and slower until the sound folded into silence. And then it was quiet. The specific kind of quiet that comes after a storm finally passes and leaves the air clean and strange, almost too bright. Tasha and I stood together on the porch a long time before either of us spoke. The lake was doing the thing it does in the late morning, flattening out silver and still, gulls circling low over water that didn't care what had just happened 40 feet from its shore. In the light, my sister looked smaller than I remembered, but steadier too, like a woman who'd just set down something she'd forgotten she was carrying and was still getting used to the new weight of her own arms. "Do you remember," she said finally, not looking at me, "when we were girls on 63rd Street, and you used to walk me to school, even though it made you late for your own?" "I remember." "You've been walking me somewhere my whole life, Simone. I don't think I ever once asked where you were getting to be late for." I didn't have an answer for that. I just held her hand tighter, the porch boards warm under our bare feet, and let the lake do the talking for both of us for a while. Detective Bishop came back up from her car a few minutes later, her expression heavier than before, the kind of heavy I'd already learned to brace for. "Miss Thornton, we found something else. In his car." She chose her words carefully, the way people do when they've had to deliver worse news than this before and learn to slow down for it. 2 one-way plane tickets to Atlanta, booked for tonight, and 3 more under the names Lily, Noah, and Amari Griffin. A packed bag of children's clothes, their birth certificates. Tasha went down onto the porch floor like her legs had simply stopped working, one hand catching the railing on the way. He'd been planning to take the children that same night, disappearing to start over somewhere none of us could reach. And if Uncle Maurice hadn't happened to glance out a window at 2 in the morning, if Nyla hadn't quietly installed a piece of software back in March out of nothing more than a bad feeling, none of us would have known until the house was already empty. I sat with my sister while she shook, one hand flat against her back the way I used to do when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. And I didn't say anything comforting because there wasn't anything comforting to say. I just stayed. Later that week, Xavier drove up from the city, and I found him standing at the kitchen counter before he even said hello, staring at the spot on the floor where Desmond had stood. "I almost told you to let it go, Mom," he said, eyes red, not quite able to look at me directly. "I almost chose keeping the peace over you. I keep thinking about that." "You're here now," I told him, and meant it. I thought, but didn't say, about the Honda Civic I'd sold 4 years earlier so he could finish law school without the weight of it following him into every case he'd ever argue, a debt he still didn't know existed. Some things, I'd decided a long time ago, were mine to carry alone. I wasn't sure anymore if that was wisdom or just another version of the same old habit. Maybe, I thought, watching him rinse a coffee cup he didn't need to rinse, it was time to let some of my children carry a little of the weight, too. Nyla wrapped her arms around me from behind that same afternoon, chin resting on my shoulder the way she used to when she was a teenager, sneaking up on me at the stove. "I had to protect you," she said, "the way you spent your whole life protecting the rest of us." "You didn't have to do anything, baby." "I know," she said. "That's why I did it." The recovery wasn't instant, whatever the movies make you think. It took Detective Bishop's team almost 2 weeks of paperwork with the bank's fraud division before the call finally came. $178,900 recovered. The remainder held as evidence against Desmond. I remember exactly where I was standing when Bishop's number lit up my phone, in the back office of Crown & Curl, one hand still holding a pair of shears, and I had to set them down before I could pick up. Tasha filed for divorce at the Cook County Courthouse before the month was out. She moved into my extra room in Bronzeville, the one that used to hold nothing but a treadmill I never used and boxes of James's old books I couldn't bring myself to give away. Some evenings she baked peach cobbler in my kitchen, and the smell of it, cinnamon and butter and something faintly burnt at the edges, the way our mother always let it go just a little too long, reminded me so much of growing up on 63rd Street that I had to step out onto the balcony just to breathe. We went back to the lake house once more, a few weeks later. Not for a reunion this time, but something closer to a reset. We repainted the porch railing, the white going on thick and even under Xavier's careful brushstrokes. We fixed the window Desmond had cracked one drunken night years before, a hairline fracture nobody had ever mentioned out loud, the way families keep quiet inventories of small damages and call it not making a fuss. Uncle Maurice replaced the pane himself, hand steady despite his age, and didn't say a word about why it had taken this long. Pulled back every curtain in the house and let the light come all the way in, dust motes turning slow and gold in the afternoon sun, like the house itself was finally allowed to be seen clearly. The light poured in. But somewhere underneath the relief, I knew the real ending to this story hadn't arrived yet. A month later, I stood in the doorway of the second Crown & Curl, freshly opened on Cottage Grove Avenue in Bronzeville, sunlight pouring through new glass onto a floor that still smelled faintly of paint and fresh vinyl and, underneath it, something like possibility. I'd wanted this location for 11 years. I remembered exactly the table where Desmond had laughed at me for wanting it. Simone ain't no businesswoman. And I remembered, too, exactly how long it had taken me to stop believing him a little. Every dollar I'd quietly saved toward this space, I'd saved in an account I never told anyone about. Not because I didn't trust my family, but because some old, tired part of me had learned that anything visible eventually became something somebody else needed more than I did. The money had come back, the doors were open. For the first time in 5 years of widowhood, I felt something settle in my chest. Not happiness exactly, but something steadier, something closer to peace. A life I'd built with my own 2 hands, finally standing on solid ground that nobody could quietly pull out from under me while I slept. Tasha came by that morning with a box of pastries from the bakery on the corner, her smile softer now than it had been in years, the tightness gone from around her eyes. My 3 great-nephews and nieces ran between the salon chairs, laughing, their sneakers squeaking on the new floor. And Claire, my business partner of 16 years, caught my eye over the register with the kind of look that didn't need words. Desmond sat in county custody, awaiting trial on financial fraud and attempted child abduction charges. Detective Bishop had called the day before to update me on the court date, and mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd swing by the shop on her way to another appointment. She wanted to see the place for herself, she said. The place all that fought-for money had finally gone toward. She was still standing near the register, coffee in hand, making easy small talk with Claire about the fresh paint smell, when the front door opened and a woman I'd never seen before walked in, dragging a suitcase behind her, one wheel catching on the threshold and stuttering across the tile. Blonde, maybe 30, mascara smudged in 2 long tracks like she'd been crying the whole drive over and hadn't bothered to fix it. She dropped a folder onto the counter with a slap loud enough that 2 clients under the dryers turned to look. "Where is my money?" she said, voice shaking, thin and high with panic. "Desmond promised me $187,400 so we could start over in Atlanta. With the kids. I'm pregnant. He told me the letter was already signed. He said Simone would never fight back, that she always puts family first." The whole salon went silent in a way I recognize now, the same silence from that kitchen weeks earlier. Clients frozen under dryers, stylists mid-cut, scissors held open in the air. Tasha, near the register, went pale, one hand flying to her mouth. I looked down at the papers. A copy of the same forged letter, my signature bent the same wrong way at the same angle. Beside it, an ultrasound photo, slightly crumpled at one corner. 12 weeks. I thought, for just a moment, of that buzzing phone on the coffee table weeks ago, face down beside his whiskey glass, and understood at last exactly whose number he'd been hiding. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't reach for the counter to steady myself, though some part of me wanted to. I turned toward the corner of the salon, where Detective Bishop was still standing, coffee cup paused halfway to her mouth. "Detective," I said, calm and clear, the words coming easier than I expected. "I believe you just found your last piece of evidence. And I believe this woman just became your best witness against him." The woman stared at me, stunned, mascara streaked and shaking, clearly having braced for a fight I wasn't going to give her. Tasha gripped my hand, hard, grounding both of us. Nyla, who'd stopped by to drop off supplies and was standing by the register with a box still in her arms, gave a small, knowing smile, like she'd expected the truth to surface eventually, on its own schedule, the way it always seemed to in our family once you stopped protecting the wrong people from it. Every drama family finally gets the ending it's been building toward, whether anyone's ready for it or not. That evening, I drove out to the shore of Lake Michigan one last time, alone, the way I'd needed to be alone that very first night with a phone showing $0 in my hand. I stood at the water's edge, shoes off, sand still warm from the day, watching the lake fold gently over itself the way it had for 100 years before any of us were born, indifferent and patient and utterly unbothered by what any one family does to itself on its shore. I thought about my father's coffee can, the cash counted out every payday, his voice steady under the hum of the shop's old radio. "Black money stays in black hands, Simone. You protect what you build because nobody's coming to protect it for you." I thought about the $27,000 hospital bill folded in my wallet, the Honda Civic I never mentioned selling, the $18,000 I handed over without a second thought 11 years ago at a dining table where everyone laughed. I thought about how much of my life I'd spent making other people's emergencies disappear so quietly that even I sometimes forgot the cost. 20 years of sacrifice didn't make me a victim. It made me a woman who finally knew, down to the exact hour, when it was time to say enough. I turned from the water and walked back toward my car, the last light of the day catching the glass front of my salon down the street, the bell over the door still ringing faintly in my memory, the sound of a new life opening, one I intended, this time, to keep the record of. This story reminds us that grief and generosity can look identical from the outside, and only you know the moment one has quietly turned into the other. If you're the one who always writes the check, opens the door, keeps the peace, here's something practical, not poetic. Get a real folder in a real drawer and put copies of every loan, every gift, every co-signed paper inside it. Not because you don't trust your family, but because paper protects the people you love from a fight nobody meant to start. If you're recently widowed, or your children are grown and gone, and someone leans on that fact to ask you for more than they'd ever ask of anyone else, that deserves a second look, not guilt. Call your bank this week and turn on fraud alerts. It takes 4 minutes, and those 4 minutes might be the ones that save you next time. And if a grandchild or niece ever offers to check that your accounts are safe, say yes. That's not them doubting you. That's them loving you the way you've spent your whole life loving everyone else. Dignity isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a woman, a folder, and an alert turned on in time.